There's two. There we go. That should be fine.
Oh, it just actually wasn't
Yes.
plugged in.
No sound. There should be sound now.
How's
This
that?
was user error. You guys should be able to hear us now. Yes. Please confirm.
Great.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. That's right. So
Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lauren,
That's
it's
right.
kind of an
Yes.
important
Yes.
factor. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Perfect. Okay. So welcome everybody to the Thursday Q&A. 2 minutes in,
Yeah.
we've ironed things out sound wise. So this it's a Q&A show where
Yeah.
you guys have submitted questions or people have just asked us over the years, and we're going to trust that the sound's working over on the Instagram live.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to do what we can to answer those kinds of questions.
Mhm.
And offer some insight in
Yeah.
that sense. So, and we can say again, thank you, Lauren, for her lovely comment about.
Oh, yeah. And for the question.
And for the question, yeah. So this is the question we're going to talk about today is something that Lauren actually commented a few weeks ago. But the first thing is the biggest news in our life is what?
We have a puppy.
We have a puppy.
We got
That's
a dog.
right. We got a puppy.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's a big adjustment, right?
Yeah, it's fun though.
But we've added
He's
3
lovely.
kids to our lives over the years, so the
Yeah.
puppy's not quite as big of an adjustment.
He is easier than a child.
That's right.
That's how I
Yes.
feel.
Yeah.
I know that might be controversial.
Yes.
It's my take, and I'm
Yes.
sticking to it. He's
Yes.
great. He's adorable.
Yeah, he's what? He's 11 weeks now, I think, right? Be 11 weeks old.
I really don't know. 10,
Yeah,
11.
10,
This
11
is the
weeks,
same as
yeah.
when I had newborns. I did not know how many weeks.
That's true. You didn't.
Just
That's
talk to
true.
me in months and years,
Yeah.
please.
So we've got a chocolate lab, and he's wonderful. So
Yeah.
that's our big news, and that's not that big of news.
No.
But for us, it is.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, welcome everybody to the Facebook Live show and Instagram Live, YouTube Live. So if you can take a second and like the button, click the like button, that one.
Sure.
If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
This also that we are working on podcasting all of these things too, so that's going to happen pretty soon here. So you'll be able to listen to these as replay form on the podcast as well. We're going to be launching a Win Ministries podcast pretty quickly. So, which will feature all kinds of different teaching segments and recordings of live shows and all of that. So you're kind of your one-stop shop for a lot of the stuff that we're doing. So that when you first announced that news on Dreams with Ken just before you said Chocolate Lab, thought of that breed so funny. Yes. Yeah, we talked about that on the Dream Show. So, yes. So we're live. We missed last week for some reason. I can't remember why. I was sick. That's right. Ill. I was ill. Yes, I'm recovered. Yes. So Lauren posted a comment with a question a couple weeks ago about why are pastors paid ministry positions and not evangelists or prophets, teachers. Yeah. So just thinking of the language that you were using, Lauren, has to do with fivefold ministry distinction. So I thought we could have a conversation about revolving around that question, right? Around some fivefold ministry stuff, and then salaries and why this and not that kind of stuff. So so it's a good question. Yeah. And people have asked that, and I've asked that. And I remember having a conversation a number of years ago. This was long before I had moved to Canada. And it was something like, actually, I remember it was at In-N-Out, because in going with all the conversations and all the milestones of my life, there's always food connected. Yeah.
So you were at In-N-Out.
So I was at In-N-Out, and we were talking about the issue of Christian authors and selling their books, right? And one of the people that we were having the conversation with, just part of an open conversation, right, over a meal, after some meeting or something, was just they said something like, I don't know how I feel about Christian authors selling their books.
Yeah.
And
which is a pretty common
Sure.
I mean, I've
Yeah.
had many people over the years ask the kind of question, like essentially saying people in ministry shouldn't be paid.
Sure.
It should be volunteer.
Yeah.
And I remember when we were interns, we would be running the registration table for
Right.
conferences and such, and you would get quite a lot of comments about how expensive it was.
Right.
These kind of
and alternatively, how cheap it was. Some people was.
Some people thought it was cheap.
Yeah.
Christians have a lot of opinions about money.
People have a lot of opinions.
People do,
yeah.
and the church is no exception.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So I think it's a topic, and I think it is a topic worth exploring too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's no way we're going to cover all the.
But also,
the
P.S. If you go to a conference and you don't like the price, maybe just don't take it out on the
person running. Yeah, the poor person.
Intern,
most likely
volunteering.
Yeah, most likely volunteering. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, that conversation was that person just expressing they were trying to wrestle with that idea of people charging for that. And then I remember within the next 6 months to a year being at a big like a music show. It was I want to say it was Aerosmith.
Okay, like a huge
like it was
concert.
Huge concert.
Right.
Yeah, it was a huge concert, like a really big one in the area, right?
Right.
Yeah, it was Aerosmith or something like that. Yeah.
Just tell us the
anyway,
story.
Yeah,
you're going to get lost. We're just going to watch you think for 5 minutes.
And that person was there at the show.
Right.
Right. And I was thinking like, oh, like we're okay paying. The tickets were $70 a piece. Right. The cheap ones were
cheaper than a book. Or more expensive than a book.
We're okay paying $70 to watch someone entertain us, but when it's $10 for a book or $20 for a book, and because it's Christian, it's like, oh, I don't want to pay that. Right.
Yeah.
And some of it is just reframing how we think about those things, because in the sense of that conversation, kind of the broader conversation we're talking about here is there are legitimate expenses to just the cost of printing a book. And the alternative is that there's no books out there because.
Yeah. And the time, the sheer amount of time.
Yeah.
I don't think most people, unless you've written a book, I don't think many people understand the sheer volume of hours that goes into a book.
Writing the book probably isn't even the most difficult part.
No, that's just the writing. It's the countless hours of research, hopefully prayer if it's a Christian book. It's probably hundreds or thousands of hours that go into it.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. I mean, I know having written and published books. So yeah. But I also get I'm not on board with price gouging, which does definitely happen. I remember going to conferences where someone's selling a single CD for $25 or $30, right? And I understand that there is problematic pricing schemes that people used just to make money, and I'm not on board with that.
But so our question though isn't
not
so
about
much
that. Yes,
Christians make a lot of money.
Yes.
We can talk about that another time if people are interested, because that's another conversation.
Yeah. Yes.
Is it okay to be a multimillionaire and a pastor?
Yeah.
That's a different topic.
Different topic.
I'm just gonna
swing
us back over here.
Yeah. Well,
why are pastors paid positions
and not
evangelists,
teachers, prophets,
aren't,
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's there's a broader conversation there, because why is a pastor a paid position first has to understand why we use the term pastor, and what that entails. Why is that common in the evangelical tradition to use pastor as the title for the position, as opposed to priest or bishop, right? And there's a reason behind that historically, in terms of the North American or the Western church, in terms of the church in general. It's not North American or Western, it's just a church. Why we use the term pastor. And a lot of that is anchored in the Reformation and the move away from the priestly system of language. And from what I understand, I'm not my passion, of course, is early church history. It's not Reformation history, though I have read a fair bit on the Reformation. So from what I understand, the desire to distance from the leadership structure of the Catholic Church in post-Reformation led to the adoption of different terms for leaders.
Right.
So rather than calling someone a priest, we began calling them a pastor.
Right.
And so looking for different title terms,
yeah,
we started using those
because they
terms.
wanted to shift the culture of the church.
So the evangelical church eventually post-Reformation started using terms like elders and pastors for leadership positions, as opposed to what the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church even used at that point, which would have been some variation of the form of priest, monk, or bishop. Something like that. Deacon is another one that gets thrown in there as well, right? And they're all biblical terms, right? Yeah. Pastor is a biblical term, elder is a biblical term, priest is a biblical term, and bishop, and monk is probably the one that's not.
Yeah.
But the term monk is from the term monoascetic, which means to live by yourself in a disciplined way. So anyway, side note. Yes. So I need to know these things, okay? Don't mock me with your smile.
I'm not saying anything.
So there's a reason why we use that term pastor as a catch-all for a leadership position in a church context.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do because of the dynamic of the Reformation and wanting to distance from the leadership structure of the Catholic Church. So, because equally, priests are paid and bishops are paid.
And I think it's worth noting that a pastor, you have to separate it from, there's the positional term and then there's the gifting.
Yes,
and we use both kind of interchangeably, which we shouldn't, because it can be confusing. But a leader of a church can have the gift of pastor, teacher, evangelist, prophet.
Right, that's right.
Whatever the other one is. Am I missing one?
Apostle.
Apostle. Anyone can be the leader of a church.
Right.
And so I think pastor is more of a catch-all term when you're talking specifically about a church position.
Yes.
It's not a catch-all term when you're talking about a person's gifting.
Right. If you I don't want to go into great detail with this, because in the Silent Fire podcast that Colin and I used to do, we had a conversation around Ephesians 4 and how the Anglican Church saw the various different functions of those 5 distinct gifts that are listed there. Some people make the case that it's 4 gifts, and I think that's probably a better case given the language there. But apostle, prophet, evangelist, and pastor teacher is hyphenated together. And so they would see the priest, just to sum up, they would see the priest as the role of officiating the service and distributing communion and caring for the needs of the community, that kind of stuff. And within the scope of that priest and their duties, they could have any number of gift mix within themselves, and then seen within the congregation too. So there's a multifaceted way of understanding that. And I think when we look through the typical models for paid ministry positions, like a pastor is, we see a similar thing, like you were just saying, is that we may have pastor as a ministry title. But that doesn't necessarily mean that person is pastoral.
Well, and to be honest, I think a lot of churches, they ask a lot from that position.
Oh, for sure.
They ask
way
too much, because what they want is someone who exemplifies all of those gifts.
Right.
They want someone who can definitely teach.
Yes.
They want a solid teacher, but not just someone who understands and has a good grasp of scripture. You want someone who can effectively communicate that as well.
Right.
But then you also want that person to be able to essentially counsel and be a therapist to the whole congregation. And you want that person to have this amazing desire of servitude to go visit the sick.
Right.
And frankly, pretty much everyone attending that church can't even live up to that. So I don't know why we expect one person to do that. And I think a lot of churches realize that, and that's why we try to have other positions.
Right.
And a healthy church will realize you can't heap that level onto a single person.
Yeah, I think I was having a conversation with our friend Ron Huxley.
Right.
A family marriage therapist in California, a good friend of ours, and he was saying that he's noticed a trend in recent years where a lot more pastors are coming to him
right, yeah,
for
you were saying
counseling. And one reason for it is they've recognized the need for help, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've recognized their limitations, but they're also auditing him because they
Yeah.
want someone they can send people to that they trust.
Yeah.
Because pastors are recognizing, I can't be the one-stop
Yeah.
fix for everybody. Which, imagine that, coming to grips with that.
Well, and we can't overlook just the changes in our society too, right? Like 100 years ago, a pastor wasn't overseeing 1,000 people.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
You had the way that our society was like literally shaped.
Yeah.
You had villages and you had
Yeah.
small groups of people, or one, you had a small congregation.
Yeah.
The way that the church functioned was very different. So that makes a lot more sense, that you can, here's your 100 people and they're your flock and you care for them. Well, that becomes pretty difficult. You can't take that model and then times it by 100 and expect the same result with one person. But that's kind of what's happened.
Yeah. Well, there's also a broader conversation there where we assume that the way that we do quote unquote church today is the way we did it. Even 10 years ago, things have shifted, right?
They have.
But let alone every age of church history, things have looked radically different. Yeah. And we assume that the way we do it today is the way it's always been. I remember when I started researching it, you'll remember this, and I read the book Pagan Christianity that had a very negative view of church history.
I think everyone in our internship remembers that.
That's right.
Josh used to follow us around, literally follow us through hallways, just telling us why pews were bad and why arches were bad, and why paintings were bad. It was a really exciting time for everyone.
I stopped doing it. I got better. So,
you did it. That's why we can joke about it now, because you did grow through it.
But I remember reading that book
Yeah.
that gave a fair dose of history.
Yes.
Interpreted through a pretty negative lens in terms of the modern church.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to work through that. I'm not advocating for the book. It's got its place, but I'm not advocating for it.
But what it did, I think, is it gave you permission to kind of not just assume what's in front of me is the right and only way.
Yeah,
it gave you permission to go, oh, wait a minute. This came from somewhere. Maybe we don't need this. Maybe we do. Maybe we just like it,
Right.
And that's important as well. Like, we need to be able to do that within our church cultures.
Right.
Because we tend to go, this is how my church does it, so it must be right.
Right.
And maybe it is, but I think we need the allowance to go, do we want to keep doing this? Is it serving a purpose?
Right.
Right? Or is there a better way out there? Do we
That's right.
That needs to be very much encouraged and allowed.
Yeah. The model for church structure, governance, leadership. I was a bit stunned when I realized what I had assumed about the church was quite different than what the history of the church actually was. And, you put so much faith in an organizational structure.
Yes.
And when that gets pulled out from under you, it can feel bewildering, right? And disorienting.
Yeah, definitely.
And so and some people just totally leave when they start to realize that it's not always been this way, right?
Yeah.
And I started researching and studying and reading more and coming to grips with it.
Yeah.
And had really helpful people to help me on that. So in the sense of pagan,
which, as a side note, is why make sure that your heart is serving the Lord.
Yes,
and not more, and not serving an organization.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, because that's really what saved you, because you did go down a fairly, the slope that you went down was pretty steep.
I had people, leaders in my life had to come and connect and correct me. Yeah,
and
really
so
concerned about me.
Your saving grace, I think, was that, you had, number one, you had surrounded yourself with those leaders.
Yes.
And you retained an openness for them to speak into your life.
For sure. Yeah.
And number two, your heart was set upon serving the Lord.
Right.
Your heart wasn't set upon serving an organization.
That's right.
And so when the organization was pulled out from under you, it was really jarring. But your heart wasn't shattered.
No.
Because your heart wasn't for that. Your heart was for the Lord.
Right.
And so that's really what we need to do, is when you're going to go down that path, even deconstruction, which is another topic we could talk about. But that's fine. We need to question. I think it's okay. But I think the people who it doesn't go well are the people whose hearts, they were more loyal to an organization than they ever were to the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to get confused, and it's going to be hard to come back from.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's true. Yes. So I that's true. Just again, then I'm going to get us back to the topic at hand, right? Because we're just kind of talking all around the subject, in a good way. I don't have a problem with paid ministry positions at all, and I don't think the Bible does as well.
Yeah.
I know people try and make the case that Paul, of course, said he was a tent maker.
Yes,
right?
That's the main.
That was his main source of income. That's the main argument. But I just think you see so much in Scripture where Paul even talking about the fact that the worker is worthy of his wages. You give the ox its due, and so he's comparing that to people that are working in their midst to take care of them. And Paul actually at one point, it says in Acts 18:5, it says, and Paul began devoting himself entirely to the preaching of the word and reasoning with the Jews in the synagogues.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So there was a moment where things shifted from he makes tents to this is the entire focus of his life. This is the whole thing. Yeah. And so Paul was definitely supported by the people around him. And then you've got, going into even early church history, one of the first documents that talks about how you should take care of those that labor amongst you is the Didache, which is a first or second century document that codifies some of the practices in church history at that time, right? And so in the Didache, they talk about how if you have a teacher among you, then you should give them bread and feed them and take care of them, and so there's very specific principles for how you should care for the people that are doing the work amongst you, teaching theology, taking care of the sick, and that kind of stuff. And the context of their culture is that you give them the food that they need and the clothes that they need and all that.
Makes me think of, usually, correct me if I'm wrong, but usually like in the more traditional, like churches, the priest is given a house. They would live in the manse or a house, so that's taken care of.
Right.
Which
the
rectory. Yeah. So like my response when I've had people come and just challenge us making money from ministry, and I always say, okay, that's a fair point. So let me ask you, we have the same expenses you do. We have all the same living expenses.
Yeah.
We have cars and houses and all the things. How much money are you, how are you sewing into that? How are you helping your pastor live? Is what you're giving enough to cover his living expenses? And it is 100% of the time met with a really awkward silence.
Right.
Because they're not.
Right.
That's the reality. Yeah. And maybe our culture could shift that way. But the point is we'd have to have a pretty big cultural shift.
Yeah. Well, and you can do that. There definitely are examples of financial excess when it comes to pastoral ministry, right?
Yes.
And leadership positions, whether that's parachurch organizations or churches themselves, right? There's definitely examples of financial excess.
Absolutely.
And I can understand people's frustration.
Yeah.
And Paul does say a worker is worthy of his wages, but he also counsels that you shouldn't live beyond your means.
Yes.
And so he talks about being an example. And I think there is a healthy critique when it comes to paid positions in ministry that looks at the example of the person. And you and I have had lots of conversations about this because I get frustrated by the example that people in ministry set when they're driving around their fancy car but at the same time, I have friends that have fancy cars that have been just given to them because the Lord spoke and said, give this person a nice car, right? So there's always a story there.
Well, this is why I think my point is it's such a broad conversation. Yeah. And where it goes really wrong is when people make a lot of assumptions and they start to generalize everything. And it's very nuanced because you have so many variables that change, my goodness, just the geography of where you live, the nature of your ministry, right? The living costs of where you live.
Sure.
We need to stop generalizing.
Right.
Maybe there's kind of an overarching thing to be said, but this is why we can't just look at someone and judge what they're doing.
Right.
We have a friend who drives an amazing car. I don't know how much it's worth. Probably a lot.
Yeah.
It's his dream car. It was literally given to him by people who didn't know what his dream car was.
Right. Didn't even know that he needed a car. Just heard the Lord say.
And the Lord said, go get this car, this color, with this stripe, all these things.
Yeah. And it'll be a sign to him.
Yeah.
That that the Father wants to bless him in this season. I mean, right?
It's so cool. But you could easily look at that and go, well, what's this about?
Right. Yeah.
We need to not run from the nuance of things.
Right.
And just be open to having the discussion and hearing all the variables that are at play.
Yeah, for sure. Because
but I do think it's a conversation that is, as to people who make their money off ministry, it's very pertinent for us, because for us it's so important that we honor the money that is given and that we steward it. I think stewardship is really where it's at for the heart of money, right?
Yeah. One of the things, remember when you were first hired by Streams to be the spiritual advisor / intercessor, they carved out a position for you because they wanted you pouring into the lives of the interns and stewarding prayer in the ministry, right?
Yeah.
That was a hard thing for you because what you were so passionate about, prayer, became the thing that you were expected to do.
Yeah.
Right. Introducing the financial aspect of it
didn't make my life easier.
No.
Because you have a dream.
But the ministry wanted us to be able to focus on.
They did, and
those
it
things,
was good,
right?
But it didn't make things more simple. Because you start to go, well, I dreamed about the ministry all night. Does that count as my hours? Right? Like I'm having warfare dreams on behalf of Streams. So where does that fit into your pay scale?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I praying enough? Am I doing enough? All that kind of stuff, right?
It's like people who take a hobby that they love, they start monetizing it, and the pressure comes and starts robbing the joy that they got from the hobby.
Right.
I think that's kind of the best analogy I could come up with, is it was a natural thing that just outpouring from me. And when you started getting paid for it, all this, you wanted to honor it, but you feel pressure and you're concerned that you're not doing enough. And it makes it really hard to find a space where you're just naturally, walking that out.
Yeah.
I could probably do it better now, but it's been like 17 years or 15 years.
Yeah, that's right. I one of the things I counsel pastors that are trying to navigate those things is, look, what you're being paid for is not a 9-to-5 job.
Yes.
Right? It's not something that it's different, right? You're being paid because we want you to be free to do the thing that God has put on your heart to do.
Yeah.
And so you're not being paid for your work, you're being paid for your life. And your faithfulness. To the call. And so this isn't a okay, now that you're done.
You don't clock in and clock out.
No,
Let's
you don't.
Put it that way.
You don't. Your life is not yours anymore.
Yes.
And there's boundaries with that, of course, and
sure.
being able to care for yourself. I don't mean that you should just totally exhaust yourself.
Don't be a doormat.
Don't be a doormat. But what my point in saying that is that it's no longer just about you show up and then you leave and it's over now.
Well, I couldn't control what dreams I had.
Yeah, and that's a great example.
That's not up to me.
Right.
And then it was my responsibility to be faithful to them.
Right.
And pray into what I was being shown.
Yeah. So God has put something in you that's valuable for the people.
Yes.
And we want to free up your life to be able to give that.
Exactly.
And if we can do that, that should be a blessing to us and to you.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's all kinds of nuances that come into there. There's the broader critique on the church and the administrative functions and the nonprofit functions, the board functions, and all the stuff that sap the life out of someone who's so passionate in the beginning stages, right? There's a critique there on how we do things for sure. I don't have an answer because we're
except that's why we need people around us.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? We don't do it alone.
Right. But all that to say, getting back to the original question, why are pastors paid and not evangelists, prophets, all that, is because the term pastor has become a positionary title.
Yes.
And so we pay the position.
Yeah.
and it is a again, there is a broader conversation about how we recognize giftedness and call and anointing and character and the life of the person and all that stuff, right? But we pay the pastor not because we're paying a pastor, and that's the only thing out of those distinctives in Ephesians 4 that we have a value for. It's just that's the title that we use. And for the most part, that's just the assumed title.
You could call it like
the contemporary church. Yeah, that's right.
Or the head of the church.
You can
put whatever title you wanted in there.
Again, Catholic Church, Orthodox Church, Anglican Church. It's priest, and then within that, there's a broad scope of how that person will be gifted to function in the way that they do. So, because again, the Ephesians 4 distinctives are not. People like to talk about the office of an apostle, the office of a prophet, and all that. These are not positionary titles that are given. Ephesians 4 specifically refers to them as graces given to the church for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, that we all might mature and God might be glorified in our midst, right? These are graces afforded to people to impact the body of Christ in such a way that the body of Christ grows and matures. So, we have to keep that in mind, is that it's not so much that we're saying those people should not receive compensation so that their life is free to be able to give that thing. It's just that in our contemporary culture, we use a particular title that. Yeah.
And then like larger churches will have multiple pastors.
Right.
Which you'll have like your family pastor, children's pastor, associate pastor.
Right. Teaching pastor, community
and that's
pastor,
generally,
pastor,
that's pretty based on a church budget.
Yeah.
To be honest,
right?
That's right. And seeing the need, right? Within the congregation.
Yeah. So we could do away with the title. I'm not necessarily a fan of the title itself, right? It doesn't actually convey what's being done.
No, it does convey to people that it is the leader of the church, though. Like it's a term that everyone understands.
Contemporary culture, what it does
knows what you mean.
Yeah, for sure. So, and that's fine. That's whatever. I'm okay with that. The word itself is only in Scripture like once or twice. It's not. Right. It was never given as a title that you would give to someone. Paul never says, he never greets the pastors of the church. He greets the elders of the church, right? So there's definitely the Bible isn't really. Paul doesn't say I am the apostle Paul. He says I am Paul, an apostle.
Yeah.
So these are not titles that I love how John Paul used to say that as soon as you adopt a title, you start to believe you're entitled to something. And so, we could do away with that.
Yeah, we called him a prophet, but you would never hear him refer to himself as one.
Yeah, right.
It was just John Paul.
He was just John Paul.
And that was a really good demonstration.
Yeah.
Like that really influenced,
sure.
really
impacted us. Yeah, for sure. So again, I have no problem with paid positions. But there's an accountability that's required in that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, for sure. So great question, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you.
As always, we go live every Thursday and talk about contemporary issues that are burdens to you. So if you have a question,
you can. To us.
Yeah, and to us. That's right.
I like these questions because they're mine too.
Yeah, they make us think, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have a question, feel free to post it in the comments. Send us a message, and we will add that to the roster of questions that we'll be addressing. I think next week we're going to be talking about how do you dream of the future without getting impatient. So
right, and how do you know that it's God's desire for your life and not something that maybe you just want?
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So that's our conversation next week will revolve around that topic. Yes.
Yeah.
So blessings, everybody. Wonderful to have you here, and hope our conversation was helpful.
Yeah. We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
All right. Bye.